Ah, yes, we all remember excitingly going to the cinema in 2015, thinking this couldn't be as shit as The Phantom Menace. And we all remember leaving thinking it was way worse than The Phantom Menace. It should have been called The Force Goes Back to Sleep. It was crap, it was annoying, and worst of all, it was just kind of bland and uninspiring. In this video, I'm going to discuss why The Force Awakens was so bad. This is Blarney and the Telly. Subscribe or you'll miss out. Okay, so yes, The Force Awakens was rubbish, but not everything about it was terrible. So instead of just completely ripping the bollocks out of it, I think it is fair to begin by highlighting what was actually good about this movie. So let's start with Rey. Rey is a much maligned character and a really unpopular member of the Star Wars universe. But she is actually a good character, just completely mishandled. I think she's well acted, and I think she could have been a great character. So, Rey could have been quite positive. Also, The Force Awakens looks amazing. We aren't talking about the terrible prequel trilogy graphics here. This movie has some of the most beautiful scenery that has ever been on screen, with some stunning scenes that light up the darkness of space, and they're just truly magical to look at. For example, that moment when Starkiller Base shoots across space and blows up several planets. It is a truly beautiful shot and it's really well edited, and I thought that was just a magical scene, and there's a lot of scenes like that in The Force Awakens. And then of course there's that ending scene with Luke that really brought the goosebumps and was a fantastic final scene as well. So when you think of all these positives, it really starts to make you think what these movies could have been if they had someone competent steering the ship, rather than fucking diversity Disney. And all of that is where the good stuff ends, unfortunately for me. The rest of the film feels more like constipation than Star Wars. One of the biggest issues I had when I watched The Force Awakens for the first time was the feeling that it was giving me ADHD. The scenes just moved so fast from one place to the next, and it felt like it was rushing to the end. There was never a point in the movie where things slowed down and I could just soak in the movie. The beautiful, slow scenes from the originals where Yoda or Obi-Wan would explain the Force were gone. Do you remember those scenes? Do you remember how magical they felt to you? They felt like they weren't just explaining something about Star Wars universe, they were explaining something to you about your life and your universe. They took their time, it was slow, it was built up, the music built up with it, and there were spaces in between the words, and in those spaces you could kind of feel the Force. Well, when I watched that original trilogy, something really stirred me. And I'm not talking about constipation here. I think something stirred in everyone that watched those movies. But then you jump to the shit show that was The Force Awakens, and Harrison Ford, for some reason, a guy that doesn't even know about the Force as Han Solo, he briefly explains the Force, but we don't get an opportunity to take it in or feel the Force. The movie just jumps to the next shitty scene. And many of those crappy scenes include the next big letdown, which is Kylo Ren. So where do you start with Kylo Ren? When I saw a trailer for The Force Awakens, was such an exciting and mysterious character. What lay under his mask? What cause did he serve? Who was he? And then very early on in the film, they tell us everything about Ben. Because, yeah, Ben, by the way, is his real name. He turns out to be a whiny emo kid who is extremely unthreatening and gets his arse handed to him at the end of the movie. He could have been an interesting and emotional character over the course of these movies, but they go nowhere with him and he remains bland for this whole trilogy. His costume was cool and his lightsaber was cool, but that was it. And by the way, can I just digress for a second and ask, what the fuck happened to lightsabers? Let's make lightsabers great again. In the first 6 Star Wars movies, looking at a lightsaber was nearly enough to kill you. But if you got stabbed with one, that was it. They were even used to cut through walls. But now, you can get sliced up the back with them, and all that happens is you fall into a coma. And it's actually quicker now to list the characters who haven't been stabbed with a lightsaber than the ones that have. It's just got ridiculous. Where is the threat gone with a lightsaber? But anyway, sorry for that digression. Back to Ben and how shit he was. I think the biggest insult I can give Ben is that he wouldn't have felt out of place in the Twilight series. Ben was supposed to be the Darth Vader of this series, but he doesn't have anywhere near the depth of Vader's character. Vader was a disfigured monster that lived a terrible, tragic past, while Ben just feels like a spoiled teenager who spent his life masturbating in his room. The Force Awakens didn't really offer anything new, you just ended up with some pathetic wanker like Ben. Everything else in The Force Awakens was just a rehash. The Force Awakens was supposed to be nostalgic, but really the nostalgia just took out all the mystery and excitement in the episode. And then the characters that should have brought all the feels and nostalgia were depressed and miserable for some reason. For example, Han and Leia, the heartwarming love story from the original trilogy, have broken up and are now sad, depressed and lonely. It doesn't feel like a natural arc for these characters to just be fired back to where they were when we first met them back in the 70s. Back in the 70s, Leia was a princess, but she was her own person and she was able to fight her own battles. She always found the positive and was willing to fight for the people she loved. Han Solo was a young, cool maverick who didn't care about anything, but as the movies progressed, he grew to care and saw that there was more important things than just himself. He fell in love with Leia and grows into a much softer, caring person who has matured over the movies. In The Force Awakens, Han has reverted back to that character from the first Star Wars movie, but now he's old and it just feels depressing and pathetic. This older Han seems like the sort of guy who sits on a bar stool in some crappy galactic dive bar every night, filling the place with Guinness farts and grunting about how the universe was much better back in the day. And you know what, Han? I kind of agree with you. It looks like Han, it sounds like Han, but deep down inside, you know something's wrong and you know that it isn't Han. And that can only be because of poor writing. I think the biggest insult I can give this new version of Han is that I didn't even feel a little bit upset when he was killed by his son Ben. If they killed Han in the original trilogy, I would probably still be upset about it. But in this movie, it didn't really register with me. And yes, he was killed by his own son. That's the big twist at the end. And his son was Kylo Ren or Ben Solo, which was the most unexciting twist ever. Ben didn't really feel like Han and Leia's son, and it didn't feel like a revelation when this was revealed. And I know that the Han and Leia from the original trilogy wouldn't just have split up because their son turned to the dark side. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. George Lucas handed these great legacy characters to Disney, and all they had to do was just send them off properly and not fuck it up. They didn't really have to do a lot. Just let them act naturally and not fuck it up. But somehow, they managed to completely ruin them. The only consolation I get is the thought that hopefully, in 2050, someone will piss all over Rey, Finn, and all the Disney characters in the same way. Like maybe Rey at that point will have become old and depressed, wondering why she hasn't got what she deserves in life. And she'll try to use the Force to influence the outcome of the lottery, something like that, and she'll end up going to jail for it. And maybe Finn will die alone, sad by choking on a chicken bone after a failed sex change operation. Or maybe Rey will force choke him because they're a couple and that's how they get their kicks now. That's the sort of thing that I'm thinking. And this is the type of lessons that Disney has been teaching me in all the recent films. Disney once used to be a creator that told us magical stories, that brought us to magical lands and made us believe that we could do magical things with our life. But now, all my favourite characters that I grew up with, who somewhere in my head had been living out a wonderful life out there, somewhere in the ether, are actually depressed, lonely, sad, hopeless people who realise they are wrong and that nothing means anything, and then they die. And that is all that any of us can hope for in our lives, is to get older and die. That's the lesson that it's teaching to all the kids who watch their movies all through the years, who are getting older now. They're telling them, yeah, we told you when you were a kid there was going to be a fairy tale story, and now what we're telling you is you're going to get old and you're going to die, and move over for the younger generation. I mean, fuck you, Disney. So yeah, thank you, Disney. You fucking suck. And by the way, The Force Awakens was just the beginning, and unbelievably probably the best of these movies. The Last Jedi was even worse. So click the video on screen now to see why it was so bad. I'm quite depressed, so I'm just going to go lie down, think about killing myself.